Most of you, when you think of a super agent, you think of blockbuster contracts, you think of private jets, you think of movies that are made about the person. And when we think about it, James Cameron actually followed this young man around to be able to create one of the most iconic movies that's ever been in Jerry Maguire. But it's incredible because Leigh Steinberg brings a completely different side to the super agent. He brings a heart and soul. He makes sure that people are involved in their community, that they're involved with charity, and his cause that he's championing right now is all about brain health. Every year for the Super Bowl, he has a party, and it's not just about, you know, the pictures that you could take with the sports agents or with the athletes. It's about looking and seeing how they can improve brain health. This is an incredible human being. He has been on the podcast more than anyone else ever. In episode 703 today, I get to invite back the most legendary and iconic sports agent of all time. But more than that, he has become a friend. And I've seen his heart. I see the way that he deals with people. I see the way that when everyone's clamoring for him, he'll take the time, make eye contact with the person, shake their hand as if nobody else exists. He doesn't have to do it, but he does it because it's the right thing to do. And it's my honor and my pleasure to bring to you the most legendary and iconic sports agent of all time, Leigh Steinberg. So why don't we get this party started?
Nothing more on my mind. I got two shines, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never know, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
Before you say a word, Leigh, let me just list some people off. Quarterbacks and first-round picks: Steve Bartkowski, Troy Aikman, Drew Bledsoe, Steve Young, Warren Moon, Ben Roethlisberger, Tua Tagovailoa, Patrick Mahomes. Hall of Famers: Bruce Smith, Thurman Thomas, Howie Long, Edgerrin James, Ricky Williams, Eric Karros, Dusty Baker, Oscar De La Hoya, Lennox Lewis, John Starks, Manny Ramirez, CeCe Sabathia, Vernon Wells, Ed Reed, Pat Burrell, Darren Erstad, Adam Dunn, Luis Gonzalez, Orlando Hernandez, Mo Vaughn, Sean Green, Paul Mondesi, and many, many others. Please welcome to the show the legendary Leigh Steinberg.
Thank you, Kelly.
Leigh, why is brain health so important to you?
The brain we're discovering has been the last frontier of medical research. But as more exploration is done, we understand that the brain fundamentally controls every cell in the body. And it's the seat of memory, it's the seat of personality, it's the seat of character. So back in the 1980s, I'm representing half the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and they kept getting hit in the head. And we would go to doctors and ask, how many is too many? When should one contemplate retirement? And Kelly, they had no answers. So I started holding brain concussion health seminars back in 1994. And we had Troy Aikman and Steve Young and Warren Moon and Drew Bledsoe and a number of players there, and neurologists to talk about awareness, prevention, cure. By the time we got to 2006, there was an answer to how many, and Bennett Amalu said at one of our concussion seminars that 3 he thought was the magic number, and after 3, there's a tendency towards Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. And I thought the role of an agent had to be more than just stacking dollars into someone's bank book, that it had to be about their long-term health. So we've been holding these brain health seminars. Last year we did 2 hours of it with some amazing researchers and neurologists. And I just started a new charitable foundation, Leigh Steinberg Foundation.org, but it's on the theme of athletic concussion to raise money for more research, to give treatment to at-risk communities, and continue exploring solutions.
Well, when with these seminars that you're talking about, the 2 hour one, was this at your Super Bowl party?
Yes. So it's like the hour or 2 hours before the regular party, and there's probably 500 people there. We have world recognized experts on the field. They talk about breakthroughs, and there are a couple breakthroughs. One, the theory had always been that when a brain got concussed enough and damaged enough, it just went down the slippery slope to behavioral consequences. Now we understand that through the theory of neuroplasticity, a brain can be rewired. And there's one process called RTMS, which is magnets against the brain, and another process called neurofeedback, both of which have been seen to start to rebuild synapses and are very promising.
Well, it used to be thought that it was neuron synapse where they connected, and once those connected, basically it was there forever. But now we're starting to understand that you can break that and reprogram. How is that happening? And are you seeing it happen at a quicker rate? And how can people do this, whether they're a professional athlete or normal, so, in their day-to-day life?
So there are a series of remedial protocols that can be helpful. One is stem cells, where you can actually shoot the stem cells up in the brain for healing. Another is hyperbaric oxygen, where you sit in a chamber, you breathe in the oxygen, it works against inflammation, it has faster healing attributes. There's a process called Bimini, which puts oxygen in the bathtubs and oxygenates into the system. There's red light, there's Nanobi. Again, two of the fundamental tools are magnets against the brain, which is called TMS or RTMS, and neurofeedback, where someone's wired up to a computer and trying to modulate their brain waves.
When you're dealing with high-level athletes like you're doing, one of the names that stuck out to me was Tua Tagovailoa, and he's been in the media a lot in the last couple of seasons. One notable where there was a highlight where he went down and he got up, he staggered, and then they didn't take him into protocol. They didn't do those kind of things. When you're dealing with a person who is an alpha, that is that level of athlete, how do you let them know maybe it's time when most of the time they're not going to concede to that?
So one of the difficulties in this entire area is that we acculturate a certain number of high school, college, professional athletes from Pop Warner and Little League to believe that they can live forever, play forever, long-term careers and abstraction. And so they're in a state of denial when it comes to their health. So let's suppose that you and I could agree that long-term health is by far the most important value on that spectrum. And after that would be having a pro career, would be below that. Below that would be being able to play in a certain season. Below that, the ability to play in this game. And the lowest value would be playing this play. So the athlete turns it on its head, and everything is about this play, this game. And the ability to safeguard their long-term health just goes out the window. And so my best allies are the wives, the mothers, family members who will intervene. But it's a tough sled. Now, to try to get athletes to protect themselves, the closest parallel to, say, pro football players is the Army and military people. They're both young. They both have bands of brothers. They're both relying on someone to watch their back. They both are in physical danger, and they both suffer consequences. And so, but both of those groups are in denial. So let's assume that if you're a young person, that the concept of long-term health becomes an abstraction. And let's assume if you're an athlete that way. So now you have denial squared. And it's very difficult at times to get athletes. The particular athlete you mentioned can speak for himself, and I'm not going to comment on that. Yeah. But see, it goes back to what my fiduciary duty is, and I've got to be thinking always of second career for an athlete, or health and everything. So it's one thing to know that from playing a contact sport, from playing hockey or field hockey or even AYSO soccer or something, that someone may have problems with their joints and have problems when they turn 45 picking up their kid. It's another thing not to be able to recognize that child. So we're talking about what distinguishes ourselves from, this piece of wood here.
So this actually hit home because we've had conversations about concussions, things like that, and before in the past, Leigh, but it hit home recently. And my friend Rich, and I'd love for you to talk directly to Rich and Nicola about their son Griffin. So my son played Pop Warner for the first time this year. He's playing the first time. The first game, Griffin is a defender. He latched onto a kid. His own player, as they came in, he took a knee to the head. On the day of, there was no signs. They took him to the hospital because he wasn't feeling well, and ended up him having a concussion. The discussion from man to man, Rich and I are friends. Hey, this happened. He got his bell rung. From a mom's perspective, and when I told my wife instantly tensed up. What would you say to Rich and Nicola about, Griffin and the things that they can do to, either help mitigate or to get through this?
So the first critical question is, at what age is it appropriate for a young person to play tackle football? And we're starting to believe that might not be till high school. The problem is the younger brain is still in development, and an adolescent brain is still in development. So when they suffer a concussion, it takes 3 times longer than someone who's 25 to come back from it. Then they have to go to school, so that it's not like they can turn off their brain function. So the first question, and it's a tough one. Look, I love football. I think it creates great learning experiences for people, self-discipline, teamwork, courage under pressure, processing great amounts of information in real time, camaraderie, tools that people will need later. But maybe it's not the best idea to play Pop Warner, and I love those people, but if you ask me man to man, and that would be the response. The second thing is all of the treatments we talked about. They can do neurofeedback with him. They can do a variety of, they can do RTMS. They can do hyperbaric. They can avail themselves of some of this. There's a very basic tool called a brain spec. And what it does is it puts your brain up on a computer, and you see every part of it, and it will show you if, because of concussions, you've had lack of blood flow and where in the brain that's occurred, and that gives you a roadmap to try to heal it.
Well, let's talk about the Super Bowl party too, because I think it's absolutely genius. The way that you do your Super Bowl party is like nothing else. And when I went, last time I went was in Las Vegas, but I went to the one here in LA. And when you had it in LA, it was the first time I went, and it was at Sony Studios. I walk in, and I mean, there's art, there's athletes everywhere. I walked by nonchalantly, Leigh, and thank you for this. I walked by Bo Jackson nonchalantly, him in the arena where people just feel comfortable in that area. And it's incredible because it attracts a person to say, oh, wow, I'm going to be able to see all these things. But then there's meat to it. So when you scratch the surface, I got a chance to be able to sit in the audience, and you had a panel. And I remember you saying that about the time frame as far as when it's best to play, tackle football. Is it best for kids to continue to play flag and do 7-on-7? And will that prepare them for the type of, collisions that they'll have in high school?
Not really. The truth of the matter is you just ought to avoid the collisions. When it comes to football, we're teaching kids at a younger age not to use the head and neck in tackling. So that does quite a bit. Then and we have rules protecting collegiate and pro players and even high school players and that. The second thing is they're actually experimentally, the Ivy League and other teams and are not hitting during preseason and not hitting during the regular practices. They just model the plays and save all the hitting for the game, and that drops it by 40%. So it has a palpable effect on preventing concussion. There's helmetry that can be a help. It's not perfect. You still get concussions, but some of that is helpful. There is a substance called orogenics that if you have a concussion and it's supplied nasally very quickly, can stop the swelling. There's another device that once someone suffers a concussion, you put the headgear on them and it lowers brain temperature and stops the swelling that causes so many of the problems. So the greatest thing about this is there's now a profit motive in coming up with solution, and that is a great motivator.
I was just talking with Lonnie Paxton the other day, and I asked him about the concussion side because, he played with the Patriots for years. He was a long snapper. He basically car crashes every play. He told me the importance of the strength of the neck. How important is the strength of the neck in these kind of things as they go through? Because again, my son is 13. This is his first year playing. I want to make sure that he's the safest possible. But how important is the neck?
So the stronger the neck and the musculature around here, the better able a player is to fend off concussion. The problem with AOSO soccer and girls heading the ball is that they have concussions and their necks are tinier. And so it's one of probably 50 things that an athlete can do. See, Kelly, if the defensive player is running right towards you and you can see the hit coming, you probably don't get concussed. It's the blow from the side that does it. So the neck's important.
So I want to flip it just a little bit because I've been watching. I don't know if you got a chance to be able to watch the documentary on Netflix about the Dallas Cowboys, but your guy Troy Aikman, plays a large part in it. They talked about the stuff when he was going through challenging seasons. In his first couple of seasons, he was a number 1 draft pick, but he was having challenging seasons. What are some of the things that you're helping your player through from an agent standpoint that helps them to be able to get back into that mental state of, being number 1, being that? Because once that's lost, a lot of times it's very hard to get back.
You're right. And we judge, like young quarterbacks today, way too much rush of judgment. It's instead of giving them time, you take someone like Caleb Williams and, well, now he's a bust. No, he's a young learning quarterback, and the only way he's going to get better is by seeing the field over and over again, by slowing the game down, by quicker reads, better decision making, understanding the speed of the game, the lesser rate of distance between defensive back. So many different things to adjust to. In Troy's situation, it was especially challenging. Dallas had the first pick in the 1989 draft, and they used it on him. Well, there was a second way to come into the league called the supplemental draft. And a player who discovered after the draft that he was eligible could then apply. And Steve Walsh, who had been Jimmy Johnson's winning quarterback as they won a national championship, Dallas picked about a month later. So now you had an inherent quarterback conflict, and the team was just not talented. Troy thought there was more talent on the UCLA roster than on the Cowboys then. So what you try to do is get someone to clarify their values. And so when it got really rough, I would say to Troy, do you think Jerry Jones is bright? Yes. Do you think Jimmy Johnson knows a lot about football? Yes. So give that time to kick in. Give it a couple of years to make sure that when help arrives, which it did because of the Herschel Walker trade, do you like living in Dallas? Yes. I like country music. I grew up half of my life in Oklahoma. Is this an ideal place for you if the football was better? Yes. So that centers someone in terms of their focus and gives them a little bit of patience in terms of allowing the team to get better in the process to work.
So let's go to the Herschel Walker. You just mentioned that. You're in it at that time, like front row center. And at this point, did you understand the implications of the Herschel Walker trade, or when you were looking at it, was it like, because from an outsider's perspective, just a couch quarterback, Monday night or Monday quarterback or Tuesday or whenever the NFL doesn't have a game, which is every week a day nowadays, but a lot of us were looking at it like, what did you do? Although it really changed the NFL.
It all depends how you use the draft picks. I mean, you just saw Micah Parsons get traded. Now, in that case, I would argue there's no replacing Micah Parsons. You can't. Draft picks won't do it. Nothing will do it. If you have a player who's that central. But as they looked at the game, they could live with a slightly lesser running back, but they had to rebuild the line. They had to rebuild the defense. It's how you use a draft pick. Unfortunately, Jimmy Johnson was a great talent judge. And so, they got Mark Stepnoski and Kevin Gogan, and they got Daryl Johnston, and they got Russell Maryland and Darren Woodson, and they rebuilt the team. But you can take the same situation and say, what happened when the Raiders traded their great defensive player? Nothing, because the picks weren't great.
So let's go to you talked about Micah Parsons. It's been a hot button And you have, like, you actually dealt in that realm and negotiating with Jerry Jones himself. This, to the public, to the outside, again, we have a different side, but from the outside, it looked very much like a lot of the deals that have been done with him, even Emmitt Smith, where he'll maybe wait it out a little bit, and then sometimes it injures the relationships. Other times the person says, look, I might as well go ahead and do this. Take us inside that. And from your point of view, what happened with the Micah trade? Because if you would have told us 4 months ago that Micah was going to be a Packer, everyone would have told you you're absolutely crazy. That's not going to happen.
So many times you look at sports, and what functions is the law of unintended consequences. In other words, something that you would assume should never happen happens. NIL is a great example of unintended consequences. They didn't put it in to allow a player to be recruited by a school and get $14 million. But that's what happened. Conference realignment has unintended consequences. Gambling has unintended consequences. I can guarantee you, Kelly, that there will be more players found to have shaved performance or given inside information to gamblers, and that's an existential threat to the sport. But coming back to the Cowboys, my whole approach is win-win negotiating, and it's to avoid confrontation and to avoid deadlock. When you get deadlock, when you get two sides locked into a position and with some time put into justifying their position, then the most apocalyptic thing can end up happening. And you would say that you could go 5 years without finding a player like Micah Parsons, right? And you could say that it was deadlock, and when you get deadlock, things happen. My own experiences with Jerry Jones are very different. I negotiated for Troy Aikman multiple times. I had the first pick in their draft again in '91, and that was Russell, Maryland. That was all smooth. I had Darren Woodson, Daryl Johnston. I never really had anything. One of the reasons was I never allowed it to get public. And when the deadlock becomes public and you have all sorts of people giving their opinions and all sorts of discussion, it makes it more difficult to do. Normally, I would tell a player who wanted to be traded not to say anything and to do everything behind the scenes. Because once you know that as another team that your competitor has damaged goods, you may not offer a lot in trade value, and it may become embarrassing to take the trade. So I tell players, we're not going to be public. We're going to be behind the scenes. We can take any position we want one-on-one with the owner, but we can't put him up against the wall publicly.
How do you, in today's side, really famously, when Iveen and Dr. Dre were just about to sell Beats, they were about to sell Beats. It was said, don't say anything about it at all. There was a famous video that came out with Dr. Dre and Tyrese, and he said, hey, we got the first billionaire in hip hop. And that cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. In today's age with social media, with personal brands, with all these things, how do you take an alpha that you're dealing with anyway and help them to understand the value of not putting it out there?
Because we live in a world of relationships, a word where your word becomes your bond. And so you're going to deal repetitively with the same owners, general managers over and over again. So one of the keys is never brag about a deal. Always talk about how good it was for the team. You can either have power in the world or you can brag about having power. And I don't recommend doing that with a series of billionaires that there are only 32 of them, and they're far past the age. It's like Jerry Jones didn't start taking the bus to training camp or packing a bag lunch because he hadn't signed Micah Parsons, right? In other words, he, at a certain point, instead of trying to leverage them up, you just need to lay out what the market is and what the player's accomplishments are and make it clear in a visual presentation um, why you're asking for what you're asking. And you need to sort of make the case and lay it out on black and white and show how this player is superior in this category, this category. Here's what happens when he's not on the team. Here's what the market is. Here are the comparables. Let's examine all this and realize what the ultimate conclusion should be.
I think it's interesting because I was having a conversation with my brother Rob, who is the reason why he's an attorney is because of you. He was very inspired by you. You've actually sent him a video one of the first times that we met, and you took the time. It meant the world to me. But him and I were talking about Jerry Jones, and he was saying, let's put it in perspective, Kel. Jerry Jones bought it for $150 million. Bought the Dallas Cowboys for $150 million. It's now worth $9.5 billion.
Let me refresh your figures. He bought the team for 140.
140. Okay.
Now valued at $12 billion, $680 million.
So with those figures, thank you, Leigh. With those figures, he's already won. So from his perspective as a businessman and looking through a business side of it, how do you translate that to your player, that you're representing, and translate that to help them to understand that, we're not going to, because every time that someone's gone against or gone up against, like you were talking about, making the person, the owner, look in a bad light, it never turns out well.
No, that's why behind the scenes, quiet negotiation done in a rational way. I've got to prove to the owner that signing this player to this amount of money will ultimately inure to his bottom line and his benefit. Because if you get this player and he enables you to win, your sponsorships go up, your marketing goes up, your naming rights go up, your ticket prices go up, your local TV rights are more valuable, all these ways. So you have to focus not on the amount of money that the owner is giving up, but what he gets in return. And put yourself in the heart and mind. This is why, Kelly, listening skills are so critical. Drawing out another human being so that eventually you understand their deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams, and see the world the way the other person sees it. So I've got to put myself into Bob Kraft's heart and mind, or Dan Rooney's heart and mind, and understand what their goals are, and see if I can find a way to craft a win-win situation.
So when you're putting your head into that realm and your mentality into that realm, when you take a situation that happened a couple of years ago, like with Belichick and Brady, how do you? I mean, from a public standpoint, we're like, just make up. We love the team. We love the dynasty. Continue to go on. How do you bridge those gaps?
By very quietly behind the scenes, the amount of times that I would go meet with Troy and Jerry Jones was a lot. As I said, Troy started out with not the greatest impression of Jimmy Johnson because they had told Troy, "You're our quarterback forever for the future," and that lasted a month until they drafted a competitor at his same position. So you've got to talk those things out. What's remarkable actually about the Patriots is that they're the team in modern sports history that had the most amazing run. And so to keep those elements together as long as they did was actually pretty good. And part of the dynamic was, I'm sure that Bill Belichick was great to play for, but tough to play for. And at a certain level, Tom Brady wanted to show that he could be highly successful outside of that system. So I think the real remarkable part of that is they kept it together that long. In other words, the system is designed for parity. So it's designed with the draft having reverse order and free agency allocations for lesser teams being bigger so they get better players. It's designed for parity. It's designed so a team goes through rebuilding, has a run of 3 or 4 really good years, goes back down, comes back up, and that didn't happen. The Patriots, year after year after year, even though everyone was gunning for them, were able to prevail, and that was because of a great owner and Bob Kraft, a great front office, and Belichick and Brady.
There's very seldom that I see an individual with all of these, and I see these in you, and in not only in your profession, but I've got a chance to be able to see it in personal interactions with you, that there's wisdom, there's knowledge, there's understanding, there's insight, there's discretion, there's discernment, there's discipline, and there's strength. Generally, people lack in a few of those, but I've seen that complete in you, based off of wisdom being the right use of knowledge and having experience. When you take a Troy Aikman and he's going through the 3 or 4 years of, being still at the bottom of the barrel, going through the challenges, Jimmy Johnson, new thing, Jerry Jones, new owner, the whole nine. And then it starts to click. What type of things do you have to manage and get them prepared for to almost save them from their own success?
It's about being grounded. So Patrick Mahomes, for example, is very grounded, and he hasn't let the externals influence him. The help you have here is players are hyper competitive, so they want to keep winning, but it's not being overwhelmed by outside activities. You win a Super Bowl, you're a quarterback, and you go from being a very good quarterback to being a household name. And every offer, every commercial, every different offer, banquet, golf tournament, those things can undo staying in shape. Studying the playbook and things like that. So it's keeping someone centered so they're not off as a master of the universe, forgetting what they did. What I always tell the players is stay in process. Do those preparatory things you know will lead to success without obsessing with the end result. Stay in the process. Do what you do in terms of conditioning, do what you do in terms of study, do what you do, and just keep focused on that. And compartmentalize so that everything happening in the outside world is in the outside world. And at the end of the day, what's really important? My dad raised me with 2 core values. Number one, your parents told you were great. My dad said, treasure relationships, especially family, and try to make a meaningful difference in the world and help people who can't help themselves. And that's why we have players go back to the high school community, set up a scholarship fund, or work with the church or Boys and Girls Club. They go back to the college and endow some form of a scholarship which keeps them linked to the alums as mentors. And then they go to the pro level and they find some cause in their own life they'd like to tackle, and put together a charitable foundation with the leading political figures, business figures and community leaders to help execute the program. So that's work done putting the 200th single mother and her family into the first home they'll ever own, or Patrick's 15 in the Mahomes. So it's all about how can you help other people? How can you make a meaningful difference? My dad used to say, Kelly, when you're looking for someone to make a change, to fix a problem, as minor as picking up a piece of trash or as major as confronting racism or climate change, the tendency is to wait for the other to do it, the amorphous they or them, older figures, political figures, someone else will do it. And he'd look at me and he'd say, if you wait for that, you could wait forever. The they is you, son. You are the they. So we're all the they, and we're all the people responsible for everything that's around us.
One of my favorite stories that you told me, this was a while back, but you told me about a limo ride with Troy Aikman before the Super Bowl and then after, and he got into the limo and you said, your life has changed. Life as you know it will never be the same because he had just won the Super Bowl.
And he looked at me like, yeah, right. He said, I said, do you know what just happened? And he said, yeah, we won the game. Isn't that cool? I said, no, you entered the game, Troy Aikman, very good quarterback. And you are leaving the game, Troy Aikman, superstar, name and lights. And you're about to go into the celebrity making machine, which consists of morning talk shows, nighttime talk shows, People magazine, and you're going to transcend from this to being a household name. He says, really? And we get out of the limo in Santa Monica at the Lowe's Hotel, and there's a massive mob there, and you can hardly get out of the limo, and they're screaming his name and everything, and you got to see it.
Well, knowing that and been through it, how did you prepare Patrick Mahomes at such an early stage to go to that type of stardom? Because not that many people were, I mean, the people were looking at him out of college, but it wasn't like he was, you know, the next coming. How did you use that Troy Aikman? And was there a moment with you and Patrick, whether it was in a limo or whether it was in your office or whatever it was, to be able to get him prepared? And how did that turn out for him?
Well, first of all, it's difficult because you don't expect that in the first starting year, you throw like 16 touchdowns in the first 4 games and be MVP, right? So, but one of the things I've done with players from Steve Young to Troy Aikman to Patrick is to try to advise them not to do a whole lot of marketing early in their career. That their first key is to prove to the ownership, the coaching, the front office, the other players that you're serious about football. And maybe we do a charitable foundation in that city before trying to do all the marketing. And the concept is when you're in the seminal, early, embryonic stage of your career, maybe it's a good idea to get your game under control before you're on every billboard. And so Mahomes didn't do any endorsements his first couple of years. Neither did Steve Young, neither did Troy Aikman, but they all caught up in a hurry.
When Patrick hit that, like, again, you said in the first 4 games, I mean, you know, first 4 games, it was 16 touchdowns or?
It was a lot.
It was ridiculous. I mean, it was ridiculous. It burst onto the scene. The Titans have a little bit to do with that because we beat them in the playoffs, and that was Alex Smith moving on from there. So go Titans. But when you do have a superstar like that, like say in Patrick Mahomes, and then he goes into the Super Bowl and he goes up against Tom Brady and it's a tough one. How do you help that person to rebound? Because most of the time, once that happens, it's very seldom that the person comes back and does it again.
So in the case of Mahomes, you have to look at his parents and how they raised him. You have to look at his inherent structure. He is just grounded. So all this is going on around him, but he is grounded. He is focused. And if you like him on the field, you love him off the field because he's a guy who cares about other people.
What about as far as how much does the coach and the coaching organization have to do with the development of the player, or can the player transcend that?
Everything. It has. So when I'm looking at the draft, the first key, if you're trying to be successful in a sport like football, is to represent the first player in the first round. That's the highest aspiration. And I've done that 8 times. But the second key is to look at the quality of the organization. Who is the owner? Does he have vision? Does he have stability? Who is the front office? Do they have the ability to assess talent correctly? Do they know how to draft and sign people in free agency? Do they master the skills of the salary cap? Who is the coach? And does he have a system and a culture that will do it? And what is your plan for developing this young quarterback? If we're going to start him right away, you better spin down and prepare the public for the fact that he's going to take development. And if they're going to start to micro obsess, in the first tough game that Caleb Williams had, they were already talking about him as a bust. That's absurd. He's going to be a very good NFL player, but you're just taking a sample that is way too early. But you look at all those things. Do they have a supporting cast that can help you? And so the care and feeding these young quarterbacks, Kelly, take a look at how many first-round quarterbacks flame out. Now, they can't have all been bad draft picks, right? In other words, eventually Bryce Young was drafted because, he was talented. Eventually, so the problem with all this is that's everything. And if you were going to have a draft, I would draft owners, coaches, and general managers if you really wanted to make things well. Because the players, to a certain extent, go round and round. Now, you can't win without a franchise quarterback, but at the end of the day, great organizations win, and ones that don't have a plan. So when you watch these quarterbacks get drafted, take a look at who's responsible for their nurturing care, training, and has a plan for how to support their development.
So let's go to something that's a hot button right now in this season, and with the season kicking off tonight. You're seeing one of the greats in Aaron Rodgers go to a organization that has a culture that, I'm not a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of how great their organization is. I'm not a Steelers fan because I'm a Titans fan. But how do you see that play out? And from your side of it, as far as representation, would that have been the best landing spot for him? And do you think it'll work?
Well, you had to look at what was available. The Steelers have been a playoff team that hasn't advanced very far, but they've never had a losing season. And that's a testimony to Mike Tomlin. It's a testimony to the Rooneys. So on the face of it, that would look reasonably promising. But do they have the firepower to beat the Baltimore Ravens? Probably not. And they're in their division. And so Aaron Rodgers, Hall of Fame player, who's done it all, can still do it. See, if a quarterback does not get hurt in the legs, they can play a long time, as Tom Brady showed you. And so I expect Aaron Rodgers will be just fine at the position, whether he has a supporting cast that can propel them. I'm not sure.
You talked about NIL a little bit earlier, and I want to jump to this because we talked about it. Actually, it was so great because you and I had a conversation when it was just hitting, and you were so prophetic in it and saying that they didn't understand the implications because I'm saying this, you're not saying this. I believe it was rushed into. And when we're seeing this, so when you take a person like a Shedeur Sanders that is almost, arguably larger than the franchise that he went to, how do you manage that type of player? And as if you were in that agent spot, how do you bridge that gap with that ownership to make sure, because we're talking about a third string quarterback, but gets more press than a lot of first string quarterbacks.
So you have to communicate with Shedeur Sanders himself and talk about what his job is now and what he needs to do. I think he landed in a very good situation for him because if you look at Mahomes, he sat behind Alex Smith. And if you look at Aaron Rodgers, he sat behind Brett Favre. And you look at Jordan Love, and he sat behind Aaron Rodgers. And so that whole concept of having that year in tutelage, can be very good. So I think he's in a good spot. Now you got Dylan Gabriel there, but it's just the two of them. And somebody's going to succeed Joe Flacco sooner or later. So I think he's in a good spot. I think that the draft was a humbling experience. So let's separate where he got drafted from the situation he got drafted into. So I think he'll be okay. He seems to be managing that well. Quarterbacks know you have to fit into the team. The problem with NIL is that no one expected that LSU would recruit the best quarterback in 2025 by giving him $4 million, and then a big Michigan alum would come along and offer him $14 million, so he'd decommit, and now he's starting at Michigan. In other words, the use of these collectives, which fund money through alums into being used for recruiting. Now, Trump's executive order limits the power, if it goes through, limits the power of those collectives and also protects women's sports. But again, huge changes. You have your top 5 conferences now able to spend 22% of their athletic budget on paying players. So no one really knows how this will settle out. You have Title IX implications with all this money. Now, there was a House versus NCAA lawsuit that was settled, and there'll be $2.5 billion distributed at colleges, and about 75% of it currently is going to college football players. About 10% to college basketball, maybe 5% to women's basketball. And then what happens to the rest of the sports? The non-revenue sports, the Olympic sports. And then again, Title IX, what happens to women's sports? So these are all questions that there'll be more clarity on as time ensues.
How is this any different, though, with NIL? How is it any different than the days of, Jerry Tarkanian with the running Rebels and their pitchers showing up with them with, jewelry on and driving cars and doing these. When my brother went to University of Memphis, I remember seeing they were in a powerhouse, but I remember seeing the basketball players, football players driving around in cars that there's no way they could have paid for. How is this any different except it's above board?
It's different in the scope. In other words, originally what happened was you had a series of players on college campuses, and they felt ripped off because they came from disadvantaged homes, and they might be sending part of their scholarship check to their families, and they were having a rough time affording the same lifestyle as their non-athletic peers were living. And you say, well, there were a lot of college students left money. Yeah, but they could work during the school year to supplement their income, which an athlete couldn't. So the point is they would go to the student store and see their jersey number being sold, and they would feel ripped off. And so they'd have been happy with $5,000, not $14 million. And so, but what happens is it's been free agency for high school football players going off to college, and then a second bite of the apple at the transfer portal level.
And if we would have reversed in our conversation the first time you and I talked about NIL, and it was just opening up, if they would have come to you and said, okay, Leigh, which I think that I would have, we're just about to do this thing. How should we structure it? Not just looking at today, but the way that you've dealt with athletes. You're thinking about their second career, their third career. You're thinking about them still being healthy to be able to pick up their kids. You're not just thinking about the day or the game or the week or the season. You're thinking long haul. How would you have structured the NIL so it could have had legs and not had the challenges that it has now?
Well, I'm conflicted because at a certain level, I care about player rights. And if the market's out there for these high schoolers, now you have 15-year-olds hiring a marketing director, going on social media, branding themselves, doing content. So on a certain level, if you're for player and athlete rights, then you think that this new system is fine because it allows them to be making money and we're a free enterprise country and everything. On the other hand, I would have probably gradually stepped it up. So first of all, we made sure the players are getting enough money from a school to take care of their needs. Over here, you'd allow them to market themselves. And but the problem is that what happened today is the Power Five conferences have the biggest alum groups and the most rapid people. So if you're Ohio State, they put the most money into NILs of any college. And guess what? They won the national championship in football. So it becomes a have-not concept where the five top conferences are elevated in terms of level of competition and the players they have as against the other ones. So it's almost like, and eventually they'll get rid of the NCAA. In other words, you'll have the SEC and the Big Ten negotiate their own TV contracts, and they'll do their own, make up their own rules, and they don't need the NCAA. So this is so much fundamental change coming at once that you wish there was a czar or someone who could put together a system that made more sense.
How do you see, as the NFL season starts tonight, how do you see it playing out? And do you see a dark horse? Do you see an X factor? I mean, because when we talked, I remember, I think it was one of the first episodes that you were on, you told me about some of the components that you saw in Patrick Mahomes in college, playing from behind, having to put up that you saw those things. What are you seeing in the NFL right now? And is there going to be some parity, or how do you see it play out? And do you have a Super Bowl prediction for us this year?
Well, first of all, I think it shows you the power of coaching to see what Jim Harbaugh did last year with the same group of players, basically, and how he changed the culture and how they won. And then you look at Denver and Sean Payton, and Denver's probably the hot pick right now in the AFC because they've reconstituted so rapidly. And then you look at Washington and how the coach there turned that team completely around. So I expect all those teams will be hyper competitive, but the Philadelphia Eagles are a complete team. The Baltimore Ravens are a pretty complete team. The Chiefs, it depends how their offensive line holds up, and they just lost Rasheed Rice for 6 games. The Buffalo Bills, and then look at the team that got Micah Parsons, the Packers. So I think those those are all teams that promise to be there, and you'll have some fast risers. So much is dependent on the quarterback and having the franchise quarterback.
Let's go to the franchise quarterback, because Steve Young is somebody who you represented, but he was also someone who had to sit behind. I mean, arguably, up until Brady, the greatest of all time. How do you manage that? And do you suggest that? Like, would you say like a Cam Ward, right? And this is, I take it to the Titans because we don't get that much press. But with the Titans, if obviously I'm not the general manager or the owner, but if it was me, I would have, with the first pick, I would have went out and got a veteran quarterback, still kept the first pick, got Cam Ward. I would have had a veteran quarterback in there, maybe go grab Kirk Cousins or whoever, and have him play behind, because there's going to be so much expectation, like you said. And then 5 games in, if you're garbage, they're going to say that you're a bust.
So my preference representing a player is that he be integrated slowly into the system. And if you have a talented mentor, see, I think Joe Flacco will help Dylan Gabriel and Shadur Sanders. Alex Smith was a really good mentor to Patrick Mahomes. Um, we never would have signed Steve Young with the 49ers out of Tampa in 1987. Bill Walsh told me that Joe Montana had a back condition, which probably was going to mean he had to retire. So based on that, I never would have pushed a trade to San Francisco, knowing you'd sit behind a living legend with that was considered the best quarterback. And the very effect of having Steve there resurrected it. So the bad back somehow went away. And there he was stuck. And, fortunately, he went to law school in the off season. So he's retained his sanity. But, he's sitting behind Montana. He's the fifth highest. Steve is the fifth highest paid player in the league. I mean, he would have started for virtually any other team.
What did we not know? What do we not know about that 49ers run and that time? Because when we're looking at it, I mean, it's just, there's the Joe Montana side there. You bring in, or you have Jerry Rice there. Dwight Clark before that. Then you have Jerry Rice, and you have John Taylor and Steve Young. From your perspective, what were some of the fun times or the Steve Young stories that we don't know about?
So Steve sat behind Montana, and that first year replacement was very rough because you have this psychological thing called euphoric recall. which is you remember something in the past with only the highlights and you never have a balanced view. So in the mind's eye, Joe Montana never threw an interception. Joe Montana led him to the Super Bowl every single year. And here's just Steve Young. And how could he ever live up to that? He's throwing an incomplete pass. So it was very difficult. But there was something inherent, and Steve saw it, in the genius of Bill Walsh and then later George Seifert, in the greatness of the owner, Eddie DeBartolo, and the way they treated players, in the intelligence of Carmen Policy, their team president. They had a perfect system. They were ahead of everybody else with the West Coast offense. And, if Steve had stayed healthy, they would have had a longer run.
You saw the differences in offenses happen, West Coast offense. I would like to talk about the run and shoot because I thought that year that was our year in 92, 93 when that Bills happened. You were obviously very personally involved because you had Warren Moon. What is the next trajectory? But let's make sure and come back to the run and shoot. What's the next trajectory that you see in the NFL that's coming that will become the norm that maybe people are resisting? Because people resisted the West Coast offense at first a little bit. And then, as it became more pass heavy, then the running backs, were called irrelevant. And then Saquon Barkley came back last year. And now people are thinking about it. What's the trajectory? What are we going to see?
So the run and shoot gave birth to West Coast offense, and my client June Jones and Mouse Davis were the progenitors. And they used it in Houston, and now basically, if you look around the league, it looks like the run and shoot. And the West Coast offense is the offense. It's a pass first, pass heavy offense. I think that what's coming back into vogue is the importance of the running back, which has been a position that's been devalued. But if you look at Saquon Barkley and the effect he had on his team, and you look at the former Titan, now Baltimore Raven, the pass rush is so good that you have to find a way to slow it down. And the best way to do it is a balanced running game. And running backs have been devalued. But I think you saw with Philadelphia winning how critical that player was. I thought in every way Saquon Barkley was the MVP last year of the league and should have been voted that, but it's so quarterback centric. But I think it's the advent of it's a running back giving you the ability to have a balanced offense.
Do you think that Warren was just like going to the Oilers in the run and shoot? Do you think that Warren was just before his time? Because I just watched a highlight yesterday. One of my friends sent it to me, and it was a playoff game against the Jets. And to be able to see the way that he threw, the power in which he threw with, I mean, it was so effortless. Do you think he was just before his time? And in the event that you plopped a Warren Moon into today's culture, do you think he would still be at the top of the game, which I believe he would?
We've probably been better because of the pass-heavy nature and the way that he did it. I think the Houston Oilers were just unlucky because that playoff game against Buffalo, which sticks in both of our craws, is they were that close to going, and had they gone, and they had this prodigious lead that there was no way they were going to be caught, and they were. And I think that really was terrible. But if you look at some of their players, they had great wide receivers, they had very good running back, they big linemen. They were really nicely built and fun to watch.
With Warren too, when you talk about like him, do you think that he would be like more successful because of the pass heavy part of it, or what was the difference with him? Like when I look at it again, his throw, like his throwing motion, everything like that, it was so effortless. I mean, obviously he put effort into it, he worked at it. What was that thing with him that was different than others?
Presence. He I used to call him Yoda. He had a presence and a internal calm that allowed him to transcend the moment. And he was a leader, and everyone relied on Warren Moon for his judgment and the rest of it. He threw a beautiful ball. If you take the 6 years he spent in Edmonton and realize he played for 23 years, if those 6 years, if he played 23 years in the NFL, now he's in the Hall of Fame, but like Dan Marino, they didn't win Super Bowls. So I think in terms of our perception, Kelly, football greatness comes down to the ability to take a team to and win the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've been talking about Troy Aikman. Troy's stats for a game would be like 17 for 22 for 205 yards. But so he never statistically, because then he'd give the ball to Emmitt Smith and they'd run it in. So he never statistically was going to be Dan Marino. But he took a team and won 3 Super Bowls. So he goes down in football lore as the greatest. That's the job ultimately of a franchise quarterback. Can you take your team to and through the playoffs and go to the Super Bowl and win?
Who do you see right now in the league that we're going to be talking about as a legend? And what comes to mind is they're always showing Brady's, draft picture of his body, and they're like, "There's no way that this could become that." Who are we watching right now that we don't understand? Like, if we were to look back at, say, in '90s or in the early '90s, and we looked at Jordan, if we would have known what we know now, everyone would have been locked to their screen and watched every game. Who is that person in NFL right now that we should be watching because they'll be a legend in the years to come?
Well, I think you start at the quarterback position, and you start with Mahomes, but then Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, maybe Justin Herbert, the young quarterback Jaden Daniels at Washington. We'll see how his second year goes. But those are all transcendent players. I think on the other side of the ball, it's T.J. Watt, Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, players like that will all get to the Hall of Fame.
You've got a new book coming out, which I'm really excited about. Why a new book? Why this time? And are you gonna? Is it a mixture of stories that you have? Because I would love to sit around the fire with you, get you any drink that you want, like the iced tea or the water. I'll get it all, and I just want to hear like the stories that nobody gets to hear. Does it have that element? And what was the purpose of the book?
So I've written Winning with Integrity, which was the 12 essential steps in negotiation. I wrote The Agent, which was an autobiography. This one's about the fact that life will set you back. There'll be reverses. Unfortunately, they may be dramatic reverses. So I start with my own battle with alcohol back in the early 2000s, and then give examples of what to do when either romantic problems or financial problems or substance abuse problems dramatically crash your life, and you're now sitting and in despair and despondence and in challenging conditions. How do you come back? how do you find resilience? What are the stories? So in it, I'm telling stories of Holmes and Warren Moon and Steve Young and June Jones and a variety of people who came back from different circumstances. And I've been public about my alcoholism. In a couple of weeks, I'll be 15 and a half years sober. And I just want to inspire other people and give them a roadmap so that if they're still struggling and they're out there and they're demoralized and confused, um, they've got a discussion of some of the mental, emotional, and physical steps you take to get your life back and fulfill your dreams.
Leigh, what is making your belly laugh that doesn't have to do with being a super agent, being the superhuman superhero that you are? Um, what is that belly laugh, that maybe you do or you're experiencing right now in your life that maybe other people wouldn't understand, but it's just making you so full of joy?
So it's the fact I have a relationship with a woman I've become engaged to, and at some point we'll get married. But having the love of my life, it's my kids, and I'm especially close to my daughter, and who's hilarious. And you come to the point where, look, when life is completely overwhelming, you just have to laugh at the absurdity. You just have to, you can't get overwhelmed and panicked and distraught. You just, what's coming next? Is it river dark of blood? Is it locust? Is it firstborn? Is it frogs? What's going to be the next new thing? I walk in the office every day knowing that, notwithstanding how hard we've prepared and worked, that something is going to go awry. Something won't work out the way we think it is. Some outside event or rule or whatever will upset our heart. You have to expect it because it's just the nature of life.
Leigh, can you be shocked anymore? And when I say this, I was in Austin with my pop. It was the first time that he went to the charity ride for John Paul's birthday. John Paul, the co-founder of Paul Mitchell, and he was the former owner of Patron. And I I was there with John Paul for his birthday. There's about 45 of us. My pops has never been in this environment. He walks up, and John Paul is laughing and telling a story about Nelson and Brad and how Nelson asked him for a job, and he laughed, and he's like, I couldn't give you a job anyway. This is what John Paul was saying to him. And Nelson said, I'll do anything. I'll even drive your car for you because, it'll help me to get a couple hours away from my wife, in jest. And they both laughed and we walked away. And my dad was, just kind of wide-eyed. And I was like, do you know who he was talking about? And my pops was like, no, he was talking about Brad and he was talking about Nelson. And I said, well, he was talking about Nelson Mandela and Brad Pitt. And my dad sat down for a second to take it in. Those moments for you are normal. Can you shock Leigh Steinberg now?
Oh, I'm shocked by the technological innovation that's happening. So the other day, I was meeting with the head of Cameo in Chicago, and he picked me up in the Tesla that looks like is a truck. And I think they're sort of hideous looking, but this one was wrapped. And I get in, and we're driving about 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I look over. He doesn't have his hands on the steering wheel, and his foot is not on the accelerator. This car is driving itself. This car is changing lanes. This car is making left and right turns. This car parks itself. That shocked me.
Wow. Leigh, can you give a message to Coach Butler, who's my son's coach? They're the Legacy Lancers. Pop Warner, 13U. What message would you send to Coach Butler?
So, Coach Butler, congratulations on your Pop Warner team and success. You have the ability to shape young lives, and the values you inculcate and how you approach the game can be a real factor of change. And I'm sure you'll take advantage of it and do more than just win football games, but mold young minds and emotions.
Leigh, I started the podcast, you know why, because my two kids, Maddox and McKenna, and I never wanted them to worship idols. I wanted them to be inspired by icons like yourself. So what advice would you have for Maddox and McKenna? And if you could use both their names, it would be awesome.
So, as you know, my director of marketing is named McKenna. So, Madison and McKenna, try to work on your listening skills. Don't judge the other person by the surface, but try to draw them out so you get deeper and deeper into who they actually are. Don't let surface things shape your opinion, but try to learn to listen and learn.
Leigh, what do you wish more people knew about Leigh Steinberg?
That I have two realities. One is the real world, which is family and taking out the garbage, and the other is the world out there, which is the world of profile, and I never confuse them. I don't. I'm aware at all times that humility and caring for others are the key.
A new foundation with brain health, Super Bowl party, a new book coming out. We didn't even talk about the movie that they're following you around now that's going to become the new Jerry Maguire that's in the works right now. You're an absolute legend, Leigh. Thank you so much for taking your time. And do me the favor, once the book comes out, because I was talking with Chris about this, once the book comes out, I want to get a copy of it. I want to have you back on because I want to discuss the book also.
Great.
Have a wonderful day. It was so good seeing you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Keep up the great work.
You got it. Have a great day, Leigh.
Thanks.
You're officially off the hot seat.
Oh, boy.
Nothing more on my mind. I got to shine, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again.